One of the challenges that we have is once we've implemented a technology like high availability and failover, how do we know it's working? And the answer is we need to test it. In this nugget, that's what we're going to do. We're going to implement the high availability and test it to verify it's working. I wanted to share with you the inside scoop regarding the lab environment that I've set up, and here's what I did. I licensed another Palo Alto firewall, another VM300, so now I have two of them. And regarding both of them, both of their management interfaces are in the same subnet. Both of their 1/1 adapters are in the same subnet, which goes to the outside. And both of their 1/2s go to the inside. And their 1/3 goes to the DMZ. So effectively, the way we set up our original firewall as part of this course, I mirrored all of those settings as far as the network connections for the second firewall. Also, I added a new network adapter to each of them. So this is the 6th network adapter on each of the firewalls. I also created inside of VMware Workstation, which is the host to this virtualized environment, I also created a new VM network. Effectively, it's just its own layer 2 broadcast domain. And I associated that new 6th network interface card with that new VMnet inside of VMware Workstation. And that 6th network adapter, which is interface 1/5 on the Palo Alto. So we have the management interface and then 5 additional ones, including the one we just added here. And that's going to be used, this one here is going to be used for HA2 link. So we're going to double up our management port on both of them. We're going to use for HA1 as well, and the 1/5 we'll use for HA2. Also, as part of configuring that additional network interface card for the firewalls, I went in and edited the VMX file, just like we did initially when we deployed the firewall, just to make sure it was using the right network interface type. Originally, in this course, when we added additional network adapters, it put an E1000 type, and we needed to change that. So I used that same process again just to verify that this new 6th interface in VMware Workstation, just to make sure it was the right type. I also updated both of these firewalls to the latest version of 7.x as of this recording. So they have the same PenOS versions, and I also licensed all the features on the additional firewall. So what I'm excited about is I want to show you the back-end work that I did in the event that you want to replicate it so you can see exactly what was done. And then we'll go ahead and configure the basics of active standby failover between the two firewalls. So here in VMware Workstation, if we take a look at the details for our existing firewall by selecting it and going to settings, I added a new network adapter, adapter number 6, and I associated it with VMnet 7. It's just an additional network inside of VMware Workstation. I did the same thing for the new standby unit as well. And if we click on cancel here and go to edit and virtual network editor, and I click on change settings and click on yes, here we can see that VMnet 7 is simply a host only network, just another logical VLAN if you will. And both firewalls have their 6th interface associated with this VM network. So I just want to show you the back end here to show you exactly what was going on. So here, this is our primary firewall. And here on the dashboard, we can see this is the PA-VM. This is the management IP address. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that this firewall knows about its 1/5 interface, that it can use it for high availability. So to do that, we're going to click on the network tab. And then over on the left, we'll select interfaces. And then here's 1/5, so we'll select it. So instead of having this be an interface type of TAP, which is associated to a zone but not given an IP address, we want to go ahead and assign this to be an HA interface. So we'll specify HA from the drop-down and we'll click on OK. And then I'm going to go ahead and commit that, and I just want to verify that interface comes up. So I'm going to go ahead and commit it. I'm also going to go over to the second firewall, which is right here. So if we notice right here, this is the IP address of 192.168.1.223. So when I did the initial config of this firewall, I used .223 as the last octet. And I also did the initial bootstrapping, told it what DNS server to use, and connected it to the internet and got it updated and licensed and activated, just like we did initially when we bootstrapped our first Palo Alto firewall. So here also, I want to click on Network and then go over to Interfaces. And you'll notice all the interfaces are, down at the moment. But we want to go to interface 1/5, select it, and we want to specify that is going to be an HA interface and click on OK. And then we'll commit that as well. See, the cool thing is this, the configuration that's already in place on our initial primary firewall, once we get the high availability going, all that configuration information is going to synchronize down to the second one. So all we really need to do on this secondary unit is to configure the HA port, tell it who its peer is, and assuming that our primary is all configured as well, it'll then synchronize the rest of the configuration down to this secondary unit. So the HA link is up, that looks good. Let's go back to our primary unit. So back at our primary device, we are going to click on the device tab up at the top right, and then over here on the left, we're going to select high availability from the list. So with the general sub-tab selected in the setup section, let's click on the little gear to edit the setup configuration. So we want to enable HA. We'll go ahead and give this a group ID of 1. And we're going to specify active passive, enable config sync, and then we'll put in the IP address of our peer. Now, we are going to be using, for our HA1, we're going to be using the management interfaces. So the peer is going to be 192.168.1.223. And we can also have a backup HA1 IP address as well. For our lab, I'm just going to use a single HA1 and a single HA2. So we'll click on OK. Next, over here on the control link for HA1, by default, it's going to be using the management interface. And if that's what we want to do, we can just leave that alone. If we wanted to enable encryption, we could enable encryption as well to secure the communications on HA1 between the two peers. If we wanted to use a backup for HA1, we could also configure a backup interface. So in our lab, I'm not going to configure a second one. We're just going to use one HA1 and a single HA2. Now here under the data link for HA2, we're going to click on the gear setting to go ahead and edit the details. And we need to specify the port to use. So we'll use the drop down, and it only shows us 1/5 as an option, and that's because that's the only interface that we've specified as HA in our configuration. So if we had configured others as HA, they would show up here as well. So we'll select 1/5, and by default, the transport is going to be Ethernet. So if we leave it as Ethernet, it's going to use Ethertype hexadecimal 7261, which is perfect. You know why? Because the other side is going to be using the same thing. And that way they can communicate without IP addresses in the same VLAN for anything they need to communicate over HA2. Now, in the event that we needed to route this traffic over a subnet, we could then use options like IP. But again, it's not preferable to separate these two lovebirds. Think of your HA pair as a couple that are closely knit and they want to keep in very tight contact with each other all the time. And anytime we're going to route traffic between them so they can reach each other, it's not the best idea. So we're going to leave that as Ethernet and go ahead and click on OK. And let's scroll down a little bit. And here we have our active passive settings. I'm going to leave those defaulted. And the election settings, let's go ahead and tell this firewall that we want it to win. Now, it's interesting with priority. Priority is a funny number because sometimes a larger number is better and sometimes a lower number is better. In the case of Palo Alto and elections for high availability, lower is preferred. So if we wanted this firewall, our original one, to be the active firewall, if it's up and running and ready to go, we can go ahead and give it a lower priority number and also put a check in the preemptive checkbox. And that way, if it's up and available and has a better priority, it'll take over. And then for the HA timer settings, we have some options. I'm going to go ahead and leave the recommended timer settings and click on OK. Then we'll just review our work and we'll go ahead and click on commit. And before we commit, let's go ahead and do a preview of our changes. I'm going to go ahead and say I want to see all of it and click on OK. So here's the legend. Anything in green is added, anything in yellow is modified, and anything in red is deleted. So if we scroll down, we should have some new configuration. And here it is. So high availability, group 1, here's our peer, here's our priority, preemption is on, and we're using the recommended timers. Great, so I'm going to close that window, and let's go ahead and commit this. Now, while that's committing, let's go ahead and take a look at the second firewall and just give it just barely enough information so it can connect to its peer, realize that it's part of a pair. So going over to the second Palo Alto firewall with its one HA interface right here, let's click on Device, and then on the left-hand side, we'll select High Availability, and under Setup, we'll click on the gear. So we want to enable HA. We're part of Group 1. Now, one of the benefits of having the group number is that we may have several pairs of firewalls configured for high availability with each other, and they may be in the same broadcast domain as other pairs. So the group ID is a differentiator. So the peer here is going to be 192.168.1.222. So we'll click OK. The control link HA1 is going to use the management port by default, which is fine. And for HA2, we need to tell it to use 1/5. So let's do that. Under data link for HA2, we'll go ahead and click on the gear to edit that. And for the port, we'll select 1/5. And because we don't need any routing capabilities, because the peers are on the same subnet, we'll use the transport of Ethernet, which also means we don't have to put in IP information. And we'll click on OK. Under election settings, let's edit that as well. And this guy is at 100, and we'll put preemption on here so that in the future, if we change the other device to a priority of 110, this guy would say, oh, I'm up, I have a better priority, I'll take over. And we'll click on OK. And let's go ahead and commit this. So I'll click on commit, confirm the commit, and we'll cross our fingers. So the commit took. Let's go ahead and do this. Let's go over to dashboard. And on the dashboard, this is a very good indicator right here. The HA Group 1 starting session synchronization with peer. And if we refresh this by clicking the little refresh icon, look at that, completed synchronization session with peer. Woohoo! Party, party. Okay, another thing we can do is we can go to the widgets right here on the dashboard, and from the widgets drop down, if we go down to system, we can add a widget for high availability that we can see right here on our dashboard. So we'll click on high availability to add that widget, and that shows up right here. We can do the same thing on the primary firewall. Let's go over to the primary firewall, go to dashboard, and on the dashboard of our primary firewall, we'll go to widgets, and we'll go to system, and we'll add high availability here as well. So this is our primary device. Currently it says it is active. The peer at 192.168.1.223 is passive. It also says that the running config is not synchronized. Well, we can fix that by clicking on the sync to peer hyperlink right there, and that will force a configuration update from this firewall, our primary, over to the secondary. So let's do that right now. We'll click on sync to peer. It says, are you sure you want to do this? I'm going to say yes. We'll give that a moment to complete, and then we'll go ahead and click on refresh. And look at that. It says it's now synchronized, which is fantastic. So now if we were going to go over and look at the details for that secondary firewall, it would have the security policies and the NAT rules and all those cool things that we configured throughout this course now replicated over on that secondary firewall as well. Now we're not quite out of the woods, however, because it looks like I didn't do a fantastic job of making sure that all of these were running the exact same version. So to fix that, let's do this. Let's go to device on our primary unit. And on the left-hand side, let's go down to dynamic updates. And I'm going to click on check now and have this guy go look for the latest and greatest versions of all that stuff. So it looks like I have a few little updates to do. This is the latest version for antivirus. I need to download and install that. And this is the latest version for applications and threats. So I need to download and install that. So I'm going to do that right now. So we'll click on download. We also have an option now to sync HA peer, which means that downloaded content would also be available on the other side as well. So I'll go ahead and select that and click on continue download. We'll let that finish. And then we'll go down to our other download, which is right here. Click on download. We'll sync to HA peer as well. Click on continue download. The other thing I'm going to do right here is I'm going to refresh this page. And then I'm going to click on install to install those updates. I'm also going to sync that to the HA peer. So it's very likely that the other HA peer, the standby unit, has the latest and greatest because I just provisioned him this morning and did all the updates. But this will make sure that he has a copy of the latest and greatest information anyway. So we'll click on close, click on refresh, and then I need to install this guy right here. So we'll click on install for the applications and threats. I'll do a sync and continue the installation. Okay, that looks great too. And let's go down to Wildfire, and it looks like I've got another update there as well. So we'll click on download for Wildfire. We'll sync that to the HA peer, continue download, and that looks great. And then we'll install the latest version of Wildfire by clicking on install. And we'll sync that as well and click on continue. And that looks great as well. So now it looks like I have the latest version of everything. Let's go back to the dashboard. And now our widget right here for high availability looks fantastic. We are currently active. Our standby unit over there is passive. Our configs are synchronized, and we have matching versions for everything. Now, to verify that this is working, let me go ahead and click on commit and confirm the commit. And here's what I'd like to do as a test. Let's go ahead and take Bob the user, and let's have Bob the user go out to the internet, and he's going to be going through the active unit. So I just want to verify that that still works. And once we verify that that works, then we'll simply power off this active unit, and that should trigger the standby unit to take over and become active. And if it works correctly, Bob should be able to still go out to the internet because we have our high availability that's protecting against a single failure in the network. In this case, protecting against a single firewall that's failing. All right, let's bring in Bob's computer. Here it is, and we'll simply launch a browser. We'll go ahead and launch Chrome. And let's go out to cbtnuggets.com. And that's working. That's great. So our primary firewall, the active firewall, is forwarding our traffic on Bob's behalf. So let's go ahead and close that browser, and let's go ahead and kill the primary firewall. Now to do that, we're going to go to VMware Workstation, and that freaked me out. I brought up VMware Workstation. I see my Windows 10 machine. That's because it's running as a VM here as well. So here in VMware Workstation, this represents the primary firewall, and here's the standby firewall. So all we need to do is take this primary firewall and simply power it off, which in a production environment may not be a great idea to do, but you certainly want to test to verify that your fault tolerance does work. So we'll right click on this firewall. In fact, you know what we could do? Let's do this. Just to verify that we are really swapping over, let's go ahead and go back to Bob's computer for a moment, and let's bring up a command prompt and let's do a ping. So we'll bring up a command prompt. We'll do a ping -t to 8.8.8.8. Great. So that'll go on for a long time until we stop it. And now let's go back to VMware Workstation and right click on that firewall, go to power, and we'll select shut down guest. And that will power off that firewall. Now in the background, the standby unit's going, whoa, I need to go ahead and become active because I just lost contact with the primary. So maybe he's not doing so well. And if we go back to Bob's computer, check this out. Look at that. I'm going to do a Control-C to stop the ping. But these 3 missed ping requests that we had, that was due to the failover. And the timers and the settings for failover are configurable. So we can dial in and make the cutover even faster, but one of the risks of making it too tight is that if there's a slight hiccup, not a full hiccup, we may want to avoid a failover condition, when in reality we just had a momentary outage, for example, on an interface. So now, if we go back to our secondary unit, so here's the IP address, .223, this is our secondary unit, you'll notice now it's active. And if we were to power back on the other firewall, once it boots up, because its priority is better than this one, it would resume the role of the active firewall, and the second firewall would go back to standby. In this nugget, we've discussed, implemented, and verified high availability between a pair of Palo Alto firewalls. I'm glad you joined me for this nugget. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.